Today is February 15th, 1996. I'm interviewing Mr. Michael Gotfryd. My name is Kathleen Moran. The interview is taking place in Jackson Heights, New York, in the United States of America, and the interview is taking place in English.
Harmony.
It's February 15th, 1996. I'm interviewing Mr. Michael Gotfryd. My name is Kathleen Moran, and the interview is taking place in Jackson Heights, New York, United States of America, and we're doing the interview in English. Thank you, Mr. Gotfryd, for having this interview with us today. I'd like to begin by asking you, what is your name now and how do you spell it?
My name is Michael, and it's spelled M-I-E-C-H-A-E-L.
Mm-hmm. And your last name?
Is Gotfryd, and it's spelled G-O-T-F-R-Y-D.
Thank you. And what was your name when you were a child?
My name was Mendel, M-E-N-D-E-L. That was my Jewish name. My Hebrew name was Menachem, M-N, to spell it in English,
mm-hmm.
C-H-E-M.
And how did you spell your last name in Poland? Gotfryd. Was it a different spelling?
Was different. My last name in Poland was spelled G-O-T-T-F-R-I-E-D.
Thank you. And when were you born?
Was born August, the 3rd, 1918.
How old are you now, sir?
I'm 77 years old.
And where were you born?
I was born in Radom.
Could you spell that for us?
R-A-D-O-M.
And what country was that in?
That was Poland.
Thank you. I'd like to talk now about your family. What was your father's name?
My father's name was Henoch. H-E-N-O-C-H.
And where was he born?
He was born in Radom.
And when was he born?
He was born around 1896.
And what did he do for a living?
He was a merchant. He had a furniture store.
Tell us about your father. What do you remember about him?
Well, my father was not an easy man to get along with. He was rather difficult. But he had moments when he was kind and pleasant. There are certain things which are standing out about his memory to me, and one was when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and we were in the country for the summer, and the peasant was leading his horse into the barn, and he approached the peasant. He had some conversation with him, and before I knew, he was on the top of the horse, and he started galloping across the grounds and to the road. He went off on the road, galloping, and I was amazed. I was completely stunned because I never knew that he's capable of such a feat. And he was only holding on to the neck of the horse. There was nothing. The horse was completely bare. There was no saddle, nothing, not even a blanket on it. And I thought, this horse will never stop. But he came around. I don't know how long this ride took. I don't remember. And he got off the horse, and the peasant was standing there with amazement. He took the horse. He was nodding his head like this. And this is something I'll never forget.
What was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Sarah.
And what was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Glat.
And how was that spelled?
G-L-A-T-T. May I go back to my father?
Yes.
I remember now that he liked music. And he had a pretty good ear for music, because occasionally he was humming the Serenade Melancholique by Tchaikovsky. At that time, we were having neighbors, friends, who lived not far, just one street away from us. And one son was playing the violin. And he was playing Tchaikovsky and other pieces. One time I remember he played the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. But what I'm trying to say, that he had a good ear for music, and he remembered. And obviously this was must have been his favorite piece, because he kept occasionally humming it. And I'm referring to the Serenade Melancholique by Tchaikovsky.
And we're talking about your mother. Was she also born in Radom?
Yes.
And
she was born in Radom.
When do you think she was born?
She was born about 2 years later after my father.
And what do you remember about her?
Well, she was a very beautiful woman. She had a Grecian face, long hair, in braids, long braids. And she was very kind and loving in a way that you really, not in a very obvious way, but she has a certain way of expressing her love, which I didn't recognize until I grew up and began to recognize then. She was an avid reader. She read every book I brought home. And she also had a very nice voice. She used to sing occasionally certain melodies from a Russian musical. I wish I could remember it now. I did remember it. It may come back to me later. And she was a very sociable person. People liked her. People liked her company. Men as well as women. She made friends very easily. Now and then we had Gentile friends coming Saturday for dinner. And I remember those hours were very joyful and very pleasant. Because it wasn't easy for Jewish people to find Gentile friends, to live in harmony and to relate to each other on a friendly basis.
Were there any other children in your family?
There was a sister.
And what was her name?
Her name was Helen.
And was she older than you or younger?
She was in between. She was older than I. I mean younger than, I'm sorry. She was younger. Yeah. I'm the oldest.
Right. And then was there another child after her?
That was my brother.
And his name?
His name was Bernard. He's the youngest.
When you think back about your family life and your home life, were there any other members of your family who lived with you at any time before the war?
Yes, that was my grandmother, my mother's mother, lived with us until she went to Israel shortly about 2 years before the war.
And what was her name?
Her name was Elka Glatt.
And why did she go to Israel?
She went to join her youngest daughter in Israel.
When you think back, what was your favorite holiday of the year?
My favorite holiday was Shavuos.
Well, tell us about it.
Shavuos was a holiday of reaping the harvest. And there was a certain leaf that we are placing on the floors, and it smelled very nice, very pleasant aroma. And you could also use it, cutting off a piece, to create sounds on it.
Oh.
You know, like using it as a musical instrument.
Well, that must
Well,
have
the
been
sounds
fun.
were limited, but my second favorite holiday was Sukkot. This was a holiday where Jewish people built their huts, and they ate in the huts. The roof was covered with a special grass called schar that also exuded a certain scent.
Would you describe your family as religious?
No, my family was not religious. They were traditionalists.
And what do you mean when you say traditionalist?
They were respecting the holidays. Occasionally my father was going to the synagogue, especially in the high holidays, sometimes on a Saturday, sometimes, very seldom. My mother, I don't remember my mother ever having gone to the synagogue. If she did, I don't remember.
What was your house like? Did you live in a house or an apartment in Radom?
We lived in a house which belonged to our grandfather. It was an apartment house. It wasn't big. It was roughly about 10 apartments.
And in what part of Radom was it?
This was not far from the main street. The name I forgot now.
Was Radom a big town, a big city?
Well, the population of Radom was more than 100,000 people.
That's big. And what was the Jewish community in Radom very large?
Yes, it was quite a respectable size of the Jewish community, and was a nice Jewish community consisting of tradesmen, merchants, manufacturers, professionals, and intelligentsia. Was an interesting Jewish community.
Tell me about the rest of the people in Radom. What kinds of work did they do, the non-Jewish population?
Radom had a factory, an armament factory. So there were a lot of Gentile people. Only Gentile people were permitted to work in these factories. Apart from that, there was a big office which belonged to the railroad industry, which was controlled by the government. The employers were predominantly, I would say 99, 9/10% Gentiles.
It happened so that my aunt married a man from another part of Poland, Lwów, a town called Lwów, which was a very beautiful city. He was the only Jew who worked in this office. He was an assessor.
And what did he do?
I really don't know his function. All I know that he was an assessor. What he was doing there, I haven't got the slightest idea.
Let's go back to your childhood and when you went to school. Tell us about the schools you went to. And
well, I started with Hebrew school, which I didn't like very much because the teachers were very hard on you. And then I went to public school, and after I finished public school, I went to high school, which we call it gymnasium. And I dropped out of school after 3 years to become an electrician.
And why did you leave school?
The main reason why I left school, that I realized at the time that it would be impossible for me to continue my education because of the hard times and because of the anti-Semitism in the universities, where Gentile students were slashing Jewish students with razor blades, and the Jewish students were sitting in a separate part of the class. That's what they created, a ghetto. I couldn't see myself to be educated in a ghetto as a free man.
Was there something, a goal that you had that you realized that you couldn't follow because of the educational difficulties? Was there something you had wanted to become?
By an incident which I don't exactly remember, I was introduced to the electrical field, the electrical trade, and I was fascinated with electrical motors. And since then, it got stuck in my mind, and I developed an ambition to get to know the field. In order to do that, one had to work. So I worked while I was going to school, to high school. I worked during my vacation in that field. I worked during the Christmas vacation, and I worked for free. You didn't get paid. On the contrary, if you wanted to learn a trade like the electrical field, you had to pay.
Tell us more about that system. Was it like an apprentice, considered an apprentice type program?
It's an apprentice, that's right. For becoming an apprentice in your desired field, you had to pay money. And that was the only chance that you could learn the desired trade. I worked very hard. I was digging holes, setting poles in the rain and the mud. But this was part of the course. But the other more rewarding experiences that I had in this field. And after I dropped out of school, I became an apprentice with a Gentile contractor. And after 6 months, this contractor asked me to wire a 5-story building. And he gave me a helper, and I wired the whole building with this helper, without having been paid one single penny.
Interesting. Was it unusual for a Gentile to take on a Jewish person as an apprentice in light of the anti-Semitism?
It was unusual.
Could you tell us a little bit more about, first, anti-Semitism in Poland generally, and then later I'll ask you about Rodham itself, but
well, my first encounter with anti-Semitism, which got stuck in my mind, I'll never forget, was in public school. There was a little Gentile boy called Sarnatsky, and his whole face was pucked. And he was a vicious little anti-Semite. When he was talking to a Jew, his face and his lips and his nose was quivering with hate, from hate rather. One day he approached me with a piece of ham. He said, "You Jews don't eat ham, huh?" And he stuck it into my mouth. And for the first time in my life, I had a taste of ham. And I realized it wasn't bad at all. Eventually, later on in my years, I started eating ham and enjoyed it.
Did you have Gentile friends in Rodham?
Well, not that I really would call them friends. When I was going to high school, I had good relationships with the Gentile students. And maybe because I demonstrated to them that I'm not afraid of them for what they are. I remember the first day in high school, I had to tussle with a student called Chojnacki, who challenged me, and I answered his challenge. So, and we tussled on the floor in the class, not realizing that the teacher, that we called professor, came in, and he was standing over us. He said, "That was enough. That'll be enough for today." So we got up and dusted ourselves off. We went to our seats. And from then on, all the other Gentiles had respect. So I said, I didn't have any friends, but I lived on friendly terms with them.
You said your parents had some Gentile friends earlier, and that it was difficult, it was unusual for Jewish people to have Gentile friends because of the conditions. Could you tell us a little more about why it was difficult?
It was difficult because the anti-Semitism in Poland was rampant. There was an anti-Semitic organization, a youthful organization, consisted of Gentile students who were picketing rather, Jewish stores with signs, "Don't buy in a Jewish store." And of course a lot of Gentile people who normally would have gone to Jewish store avoided the Jewish store. Of course they didn't want to be blacklisted. Apart from that, the anti-Semitism was whipped up by the Catholic Church.
In what ways?
And claiming that the Jews have killed Christ, and also spreading rumors that the Jews were using Gentile children's blood to mix it with the matzah. You know what the matzah is, the bread that Jews eat at Passover. So that was enough to whip up.
And these stories were still being told in the 1930s in Poland.
Oh yes.
Was the period around Good Friday and Easter a particularly difficult time? Good Friday, Easter, the Christian Good Friday and Easter in the spring?
There was hardly any difference because all days were more or less the same as far as anti-Semitism is concerned.
Did you, as a youngster, join any organizations, any Jewish organizations?
Well, as a student, I joined the Masada, which was a student Zionist organization. And we kept a number of activities.
Could you tell us about some of them? Could you tell us about some of the activities?
The main activity, of course, was the activity about Zionism, the creator of Zionism, what Zionism is all about. Apart from this activity, we had other art performance activities. We were staging plays. We have organized a quartet where I was part of it. And we were singing popular music as well as some classical songs like Chanson Triste by Tchaikovsky and Schubert songs. As a matter of fact, we were traveling to little towns performing. But we also gave a concert in our town in the city theater, which was not very far from where we were living.
Thank you. We'll pause now to change the tapes. Gotfryd on February the 15th, 1996. Mr. Gotfryd, we were talking about your growing up in Radom, in Poland, and you were talking about the prevalence of anti-Semitism in Poland. Were you aware in the late 1930s, when you were a young man, of what was going on in Germany with Hitler and...
Well, we were very much aware. In our city, we helped German Jews who were expelled from Germany to Poland. And this gave us a very good chance to know from the horse's mouth what was going on, besides listening to the news, reading newspapers.
And what did they tell you about what happened to them in Germany?
They told us that they were told to leave Germany within 24 hours. And that was a very kind gesture on the part of the Nazi government. They were glad to leave with their lives.
Do you remember what year this was?
This was 1937. Around that time.
Did you at that time think that Nazi Germany would be a threat to Poland?
Nobody thought in those terms. As a matter of fact, we were assured by our political leaders that we can live in peace and don't worry about Germany. What they really were doing, they were lulling us to sleep. Not only us, but the whole nation. It turned out later on, after the invasion, that the Polish government was all sold out to Germany.
Did your family ever consider joining your grandmother and your aunt in Palestine or going somewhere else from Poland?
Not that I can remember.
And how old were you in 1939?
I was 21, 20.
Yeah. And what were you doing?
I was working as an electrician.
And were you still living
At that time, I went on my own, and I was doing electrical work for a chicory factory called Java. And the first bombs, German bombs who fell, were dropped in this factory where I was present with my partner, mounting an electrical motor which we have repaired. Those were the first bombs. And my sister happened to be working in the office. And as far as I can remember, one bomb or shrapnel injured a man who was in charge of the office. His name was Teitelbaum. And he was bleeding profusely. So I and my worker, or partner, I would say, called a doroshka, which is a vehicle, with a horse driven, and put him on this cart, put him on the doroshka, and took him to the St. Casimir Hospital, where unfortunately he died a day or two later. At the same time, my sister was injured with a little shrapnel she had. She was bleeding their forehead. And I remember having met my father when I was on the doroshka. He was running towards the factory. He was, to find out whether she's safe, because the news spread very fast, like a lightning, that the chicory factory was bombarded. And then we knew we are not safe anymore. That was the beginning of the invasion of Poland.
And was it a very long time before the Germans arrived in Radom?
about a day or two,
And
or 3.
And what do you remember about that day?
Was a very eerie day. When we found out that they are in our city, people were sitting in their houses. Nobody was going out. For fear, obviously. But after a while, people started coming out of their homes and confronted the reality, which was pretty sad, to say the least. At first, the Germans behaved the first day or so, but the second and third day, they started to demonstrate their brutality.
In what ways?
Dragging people out of their homes, make them work, beating the hell out of them, and called them verfluchte Jude. I remember I was present when they dragged my uncle out, and to the place where the Masada organization was located, exactly the same locality. They were parking their cars there, all their vehicles, and they made all the Jewish people that they caught off the streets, made them work there, including myself. And I told them that I'm an electrician, so they gave me some electrical work to do on the cars, which I happen to know as well. And this kind of behavior was growing more intense from day to day, And after a while, it slowed down.
In these early days, the early period of the German occupation.
These are the early periods.
In the early days.
The first early days.
To your knowledge, did they treat the Poles, the Polish Gentiles, differently from the Polish Jews in those first days?
By ignoring them, it meant that they treated them better. They didn't they were in catching, rather. It's like catching, like going hunting. They were hunting for Gentiles. They were hunting for Jewish men.
To put them to work.
Put them to work and beat the hell out of them. Not one single Gentile that I know was ever caught by the Germans and put to work.
I'd like to focus now on the period of about a year and a half, about 18 months.
Oh my God. I shouldn't have done this. Okay.
You okay?
I shouldn't have leaned against. Yeah.
I'll have to lean forward a bit. In the period before the Germans officially established the ghetto in Radom, I'd like to talk about that first period before the ghetto.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you about the ways in which your life changed. Were there restrictions put on you? Were you allowed to make a living? How did you get paid? How did you eat? So if you could tell us a little about that.
Well, I made contact with the offices of the German agriculture. They were looking for an electrician. And their offices were residing where in the high school where I attended before the war. And I applied for electrical work there. And I was informed that they need a contractor who will execute electrical work in a responsible way. So I introduced myself as such, and they told me what they want done, what they want electrified, and I have to put a bid. And I followed through the whole procedure, and my bid was accepted, and I started working for this agricultural department for a period of time until the end, practically. Until the end, that is, until we were incarcerated and the concentration camp under Skolno.
I'm going to ask you a question back in time, in fact, before you were born. To your knowledge, was Radom occupied by the Germans during World War I?
Yes.
Did your parents ever talk about that?
Yes, they were telling stories now and then when I was very little.
Yeah, now, bringing back to, now we're back to 1940-41, the Germans have returned. And your parents had experience with the German occupation. What did they talk about? What did they tell you and your sister and brother? What did they think was going to happen?
They had no idea what was going to happen. All I know is they expressed their amazement with the difference of the Germans from 1914 war and the present war.
And how did they say they were different?
The cruelty, the persecution, the anti-Semitism, the hate, which they have never confronted in the First World War.
So they were really unprepared for.
Nobody was prepared for this.
Was your father allowed to keep his furniture store?
No, no. He was out of business before the war.
I see.
So there was no problem with that.
Well, your sister...
But
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask if your sister and brother were able to work during this period.
my brother was working for the same studio that he worked before the war. As a matter of fact, he was making his apprenticeship as a photographer. And my sister was, if I recall, still going out to the Java chicory factory.
So the Germans at this point weren't interfering with your family's ability to work? Were they restricting occupations?
No, they weren't restricting occupation. No, occupation they weren't restricting. But they were marking us with armbands. So every Jew has to wear a yellow armband.
And what was on the armband?
And the armband was the Star of David.
Did this happen immediately, or did it happen a few months later after that?
A few months later after they came.
Did they establish a Jewish council, a Judenrat, do you recall?
Yes, they did.
And what do you recall about the Judenrat in Radom?
Well, the Judenrat was a tool for them for slave labor. Instead of going around houses and dragging out people, and they didn't know where the Jews were living exactly, they used the Judenrat to collect the people and deliver it to them.
Were the Germans using Jews for slave labor before the establishment of the ghetto? Were they rounding people up?
Yes, they were doing that. Very much so.
Could you describe a bit about the roundup? Was it just random if you were on the street?
That was random. They were catching people off the street.
Did you have any warning? Did you ever hear they're coming?
No. No, without any warning. When you found out, it was too late.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about that first period before the ghetto, about the conditions that you lived under?
Well, we all lived in fear. Since we were marked, there are certain places that we are not allowed to go. And there was a curfew night. So our freedom was very limited. Besides living with fear, you had no freedom, you know. So it was very, very hard, very difficult. And sometimes walking the street, a German kid could walk over to you because you're marked, or he knows you're Jewish, spit in your face and curse you. You verfluchte Jude.
Could you translate that?
I mean, it happened to me.
How did the Gentile population react? Did they try to help Jews, particularly the Gentiles that your family knew? What was their attitude toward you and the family?
Are you referring to friends?
Friends of your family, yeah.
We lost contact with them. I believe that they were just as shocked as we were, those particular people, because I knew them. They were good people. Because the friendship started from them being our customer, my parents' customers. And this is how they developed trust to each other. So this is how they became friends.
In the general population, the general non-Jewish population, were you aware of any attempts to help the Jews during?
No. Quite on the contrary. Some of them were poking fun and way not directly collaborating with the Germans, out of ignorance. And being what they were, anti-Semites.
Were you all living at home? Your parents and the three children, were you all living at home?
We were all living in the same place.
I'd like to turn now to April of 1941, when the ghettos were established in Radom. What do you remember about that? Were you told? What were you told by the German authorities?
There's something I would like to mention.
Please.
While we were living outside the ghetto, a German family was assigned to us to live with us.
Tell me.
It was a couple with a young kid, a young boy. He was about 7 or 8 years old, sickly, He was a party man. His name was Zirschke. It just came back to me. I never thought of it all those years. I never thought I'll remember it. His name was Zirschke. He was tall, smoking a pipe, very reddish face, like abused by liquor, it looked like. And he always liked to sit near the kitchen, near the stove in the kitchen. And he was very amiable. It was very nice, very pleasant. I don't think he knew what was going on. Because I can't imagine any party man, any Nazi party man, being aware, you know, of this situation that the Jews were put in, would be so friendly with Jewish people. I remember his wife was short and stocky. She was round all around, you know. And they were nice people. We didn't have much space, but they lived in one room. We gave them one room, and we lived in the other room, all of us. And we shared this one-bedroom apartment. I thought it just popped into my mind, the memory of this
That certainly happens. How did
experience.
What was their reaction when the ghetto was declared? Were they of any help to you, or did they?
I don't remember what happened. Maybe they have moved before. It's very possible. Maybe he was called back to Germany. I don't remember what happened.
Well, tell us about the ghetto. How did your life change when the ghetto was established?
Life changed immensely. We had less freedom of moving. And they have created Jewish police. So we had to deal, civilians, with Jewish police and German police. Like double jeopardy.
Was it an enclosed ghetto?
It wasn't closed, yes, it wasn't closed.
And were you living in
And you need, to leave the ghetto, you needed a permit. You just couldn't leave the ghetto without permit.
Were you living...
Caught without a permit, you shot.
And how would one get this permit?
If you work for the Germans, anybody who worked for the Germans had a permit.
Did you have to move into the ghetto, or were you already living in the area they declared to be the ghetto?
We had to move in.
And were you assigned a living space to move into? Were you allowed?
Yes, we were assigned a living space through the
Judenrat?
Jewish
The Judenrat?
Judenrat, Ältestenrat, Judenrat.
And were you living just with your own family, or were you doubling up?
We were sharing a house with another family.
And
But there was one main entrance, and then there went into the hallway, and then two separate individual entrances to different parts of the house.
Did the Germans give any reason for the establishment of a ghetto?
No. Why should they? They had no reason to give any reason.
And how did they get you to the ghetto? Did you go on your own? Or?
You were on your own. You had to make your own way to get into the ghetto. You had so many hours or so many days, which I don't remember exactly.
How did you earn your living in the ghetto?
I continued working for the Germans, doing electrical work for the Germans.
Did you have a permit?
Yes. So I had a permit leaving the ghetto.
And what about your sister and brother? Were they able to work?
My brother started working for the Propaganda Amt from his studio. He was shifted from his studio to the German Propaganda Amt.
As a photographer?
As a photographer, yeah.
And what about your sister?
My sister, I don't think she was working. I don't remember. I really don't remember what she was doing.
How did you get food when you were in the ghetto?
Well, we had stamps